Welcome into our latest Fanalyst interview. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and also at 5 Reasons Sports on Twitter. And now we have from the 5 Reasons Sports Network and various other outlets, which is one of the things we're going to talk to her about. I know that view. I know the kitchen view in the background. I'm very familiar with it. You can find her on Twitter at her name, Allana Tachauer. That's the best I've ever pronounced it.
Only time.
I saved it for Fanalyst. That's what I saved it for. So you can follow her there on Twitter. She lives up in the Chicago area, up in the frigid cold here. We're doing this during Christmas week. And what we're going to get into today is kind of the content creator in the NBA space who is maybe covering multiple teams, which is something that has come about in the modern age. Typically, you work for a newspaper, you get into it, and it's just like, okay, you're going to cover that one team for that local paper. But these days, the landscape has opened, and you can cover more than one team. So before we start kind of getting into your backstory, let's get into what you're doing now. So obviously, 5 Reasons Sports, you're on a couple of programs with us. You appear on 5 on the Floor and also Feel the Heat. And we're with Clutch Corner on the YouTube channel. But that's not all you're doing. So what else are you doing?
Well, right now, I'm still technically contracted with NBC Sports Chicago as an associate producer, although I have not had a shift in quite some time because my full-time is taking over. And I recently was covering the Chicago Bulls for Clutch Points as well.
Yeah, and again, that is one of the things here where maybe you're following two different teams. But look, you cover the Bulls, and I know that you tweet about the Bulls.
People don't like that at all.
So I was going to ask you about that because in the modern Fanalyst age, you are expected to root for the team that you cover, which was not always the case. There was supposed to be this wall of objectivity, but people follow you on Twitter because you are passionate about the Miami Heat. So let's get into that. How did that passion come about?
So randomly in middle school, I followed exactly 2 players, Dwayne Wade and Carmelo Anthony, when they were both still in college. Could not tell you why. I think I was in like 5th grade at the time, even though now I'm aging myself. But then when, Wade was at Marquette and then the Heat drafted him. So at the time I was a Chicago Bulls fan. I'm born and raised. I've lived here all my life. But slowly but surely I kind of transitioned over to a full-fledged Miami Heat fan. Once I would say probably in like 2011, I covered the Bulls a little bit in like the 2010, 2011 era. And once that curtain came down and I realized kind of what the organization was looking like, I, for better or worse, jumped ship completely to the Miami Heat. But it was Dwayne Wade first and foremost.
So the Garpax era, that was not for you for the long term.
No, it was not for me. As a member of the media, they made our lives very difficult. And even after I kind of left that media space, when I went to grad school, as a fan, it rubbed me wrong. And so I just kind of fully bought into what Riley and the other people in the Heat front office were doing. And I've been kind of ride or die ever since.
All right. So let's get into that because you were covering them in the media space, as you said. So we have some people in our network and other networks around the country that never were covering the media space. I mean, essentially, they're covering in the media space now because they were on Twitter and they were found. And then all of a sudden, they're starting to do some of those things. But you were doing those things already. So was your ambition coming out of school to cover a team full-time in some capacity?
So I went to college and my first semester I was a psych major. And after taking one kind of science psych course, I was like, this isn't it. And then I transferred over to nonfiction creative writing because my college did not have journalism somehow. And then in the midst of that, I actually started covering the Chicago Bulls for the neighborhood paper. It was called the Chicago Flame. I actually don't know if it exists anymore. And then I got an internship with, at the time it was Comcast Sportsnet Chicago, now NBC Sports. So I got really lucky because I was one of like 5 interns and I was the only one who liked NBA basketball. So they fully put me on the Bulls beat. I covered a little bit of the Chicago Bears as well during the Jay Cutler era. But mostly I was on the Bulls beat. So yeah, I was at the old practice center, the Berto, with, Casey and all the guys at that time. And it was a lot of fun on the one hand, but on the other hand, kind of transitioning back to a fan for a little bit. Once I went to grad school, I did new media studies and I concentrated in sports media. It, like I said, was hard to swallow because the stories I have coming out of the Bulls, I mean, they really made our lives difficult. They did not want us to access players. They were very controlling about the questions we were asking. And so at the time, after grad school, I actually started writing for Fansided for All You Can Eat. That was not my name. I inherited that. But I wrote for them for, I think, one season, then took over as editor for 4 or 5. In the meantime, I was writing for Miami Heat Tip-Off magazine, and then got involved again with NBC Sports on Bulls Outsiders. So I've been bouncing between covering the Miami Heat and the Chicago Bulls. And then I was with the U Chicago men's basketball team here for almost 7 seasons. COVID derailed that. But yeah, I've been doing sports media for like 11 years now. My goal was always to actually, though, work for the team, not to cover the team from the outside in, which is why I think my time with U Chicago was so important, just because it was me and the team. It wasn't like an outsider looking in.
All right, so there's 2 major topics I want to get into from what you talked about. So let's get into how to cover a team when a team doesn't want to be covered, because I feel like that's one of the reasons that the Fanalyst has emerged, and that is because the teams have become so insulated. They don't want to give out information. They credential fewer and fewer people. And also the newspapers, the TV stations, the radio stations are credentialing fewer and fewer people because their resources have been cut and the landscape has changed. And also now COVID has accelerated that because, most stuff's on Zoom. The teams can control that. And I don't think we're ever going back to the way we were. I've talked to others here about this. I don't think the locker rooms are ever going to be fully open and not for as many people as they were before. Do you see it from that perspective now that really, because you were on the inside and you were working, and Casey's a good friend of mine, others who were around the team at the time, that there really is not going to be a place for those people as much, or that they just aren't going to have the importance that they had before because the access is not what it used to be and the teams don't want it to be what it used to be?
Yeah, it's tricky because a lot of times now I think things are kind of like breaking news is reported on Twitter before the major outlets even have it. And, I still am kind of connected to Casey specifically because of NBC Sports, and he does still cover the games. But, a lot of his access kind of comes about. It has to be more in a roundabout way because everything's out there already. So he needs to find a different angle or look through a different lens. So yeah, I do think that things are definitely changing. I think that, to your point, kind of the Gar Pax era wouldn't have done very well right now because good luck trying to keep things in-house. They used to use like blackout curtains for the practice tunnel. So you didn't know, they didn't want you to know who was there or not. You start learning whose car is who. And then, when they tell you, oh, so-and-so left for the day, they're lying to you. But I think right now it's harder to hide things, honestly, which for better or worse. But yeah, I do think the landscape is changing and something like Twitter is giving a lot more people a lot more access.
Yeah, and I covered a couple of those Heat Bulls playoff series. I feel like the Derrick Rose stuff that went on during that period of time with the level of secrecy around his health status never would have played out. And my whole thing is, the Patriots are kind of the counter example to this, but I don't think the secrecy stuff helps you win games anyway. But what it does do is it, again, I think puts more of a premium on those who are going to try to find out the why, maybe do their own video research, or maybe find other types of sources outside the team. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, though, is obviously you enter a space that is primarily a male space. I would say probably 95% of those you worked with were men, correct? I mean,
correct.
Particularly covering the Bulls.
If not more than that, yeah.
Okay, so what is that experience like? Because we've had I had Taylor Mathis on here, and she talked about getting into kind of the gambling space as a woman and what that entails. What was that like in terms of your coverage on the team on site, but also what you social media and other places? How is that different from, say, the male experience?
You know what? I have to be honest. I've been really lucky, I think. I've heard some horror stories and I've really not experienced much. I think in my 5 seasons as an editor for All You Can Heat, for example, I got like 1 negative comment with kind of a gender implication. I never felt like I didn't have access to things. I will say when I first joined U Chicago, they never had anyone doing their media, period, but much less a girl. And so kind of the shock value of me going into that locker room was hilarious, but it was a little different because they were college guys. It's D3. They're not used to that. But that was really the only time that I kind of felt anything. It's funny because I think a lot of people on this network are very protective of me, and I really appreciate it. There are some comments that come here and they're on live streams, but they're kind of handled immediately. So I've been really fortunate. I don't actually feel like I've been at a disadvantage, but that's not to take away from people, you know, who have definitely suffered from that and or have had a lot of trolls thrown their way.
Okay, so let's expand upon that, because we've talked about these two things in concert now, right? Like the model has been broken down in terms of more fanalists having maybe more input and authority with fans, because again, the access to the traditional media is not what it was. So, you know, maybe people are going to turn to alternative sources now. And also, obviously, dealing with this, you know, entering the space as a woman. Do you think we're going to see an outgrowth of kind of the female fanalist, so to speak? Like where maybe more women who didn't feel like they had a shot, you know, getting into being taken as seriously as they should be in the mainstream area, maybe with a newspaper, radio station, etc., maybe find these other outlets, like you mentioned, fan-sided, but others. I mean, there's so many of them out there, or networks, again, like ours or others around the country, that maybe we're going to see an outgrowth in sort of, you know, women sort of making their impact in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. And to be honest, I think I've already kind of seen it a little bit. NBA Twitter, so to speak, is definitely not what it used to be. Again, I've been doing this for like 11 years, and I was on Twitter pretty early on. And I can probably count on maybe 3 fingers the other women that I was interacting with on a daily basis, for regardless if it was the Bulls, Heat, or other teams. But now, you know, we even have like Culture Shock. I was so excited that I was on that pod, because to have an all-female NBA pod is amazing. And even people I interact with on a daily basis, I've already seen the growth there, and I hope it only continues. I think that, you know, it not being as traditional of a space does help. And maybe the fact that there's no kind of physical barrier that way, because again, I was working with a D3 team. If you're going a little bit upwards, maybe there is no access to the locker room still. Maybe people don't feel as comfortable. So I think knocking those walls down should definitely help.
All right, final thing here. You've been coined the first lady of Heat Twitter. I think that came from inside the network.
I think it was Royal. Yes.
It might have been Royal, who we've done our own episode with here. Do you like it?
Oh, I love it. I love it. I can't even remember when that came up. I think it was on a Clutch Corner, but I was like, this is sticking, and I'm obsessed. I've actually never had a nickname in my life, so I embraced it with open arms.
All right, the first lady of Heat Twitter, a Heat fan, a Dwayne Wade fan, trapped in Chicago. I'll before you get out, that we try not to remember it in Miami. It didn't happen.
I know.
It also didn't happen in Cleveland. Really, it didn't happen in Cleveland. But I mean, were you conflicted during Dwayne's time in Chicago? I mean, did you go full Bulls fan at that point?
So I knew he was going to come back to Miami. I didn't have a doubt for a single second. So the way I saw it, I was like, he's here. Let me full out enjoy it. There are like jokes flying around that I was stalking him while he was here. I was not. I happened to know where he lived, and I know where he walked his dogs, and I may have been around that area a little bit more than usual. But I went to a lot more Bulls games that season, for sure. But yeah, I mean, I was happy he went back, but I enjoyed his time here for sure.
All right, we're going to do like Men in Black. You're too young to remember the movie, but we're going to just make you forget the whole Dwayne Wade Chicago thing.
I have a trash memory, so that should not be that hard.
Good. First lady of Heat Twitter. It didn't happen. He spent his entire career down here in Miami. All right, you can find her on the 5 Reasons Sports Network on various platforms, and also covering the Bulls. Again, we don't talk about that as well. One of our favorite Fanalysts, Allana Tachauer. I got it right.
Yep, 2 for 2.
All right, there you go. I'm going to close on that.